going to be in Mark chapter 5 this evening. We were here this morning too, but I want to dig into this deeper. Mark chapter 5. Pray for Pastor Dusty and the crew. I'm pretty sure the roads coming over the hill are going to be pretty messy. He's been a little bit under the weather anyway, so I'm hoping you get some rest tonight. And then you said... Yep. And I think same thing with Bruce and Janice. I just want to stay safe. But all right, so Mark chapter 5. Again, we read some of this morning, but we're gonna focus on part of the story rather than everything like we did this morning. But Mark chapter 5, starting at verse 25, and I'm going to read several verses, and then we'll open up in prayer and get into the message. But Mark chapter 5, starting at verse 25. It says, a certain woman which had an issue of blood 12 years, and had suffered many things of many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was nothing bettered, but rather grew worse, when she had heard of Jesus, came to the press behind, and touched his garment. For she said, if I may touch but his clothes, I shall be whole. And straightway the fountain of her blood was dried up. She felt in her body that she was healed of that plague. And Jesus immediately, knowing in himself that virtue had gone out of him, turned him about in the press, and said, who touched my clothes? And his disciples said unto him, thou seest the multitude thronging thee, and sayest thou, who touched me? And he looked around about to see her that had done this thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what was done in her, came and fell down before him and told him all the truth. How you doing? Come on in. So let's open up with a word of prayer, and then, like I said, we'll get into the message this evening. God, we just thank you for your goodness. We thank you for the story that we can read and we can see your power. We see Jesus displaying his authority over the physical realm. But we also see his mercy and his compassion. I pray that as we dig into your word a little bit more deeply, I pray that you would allow us to leave here this evening knowing that we heard from you and understanding a little bit deeper your compassion and your power. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. So like I said, we preached a message this morning out of the same passage. We went through the whole section here. We talked about Jairus' daughter, and then we also talked about this. We kind of grazed it a little bit. But I wanted to dig into it a little bit more deeply because I think there's some things in here. One that blessed me as I was studying it, and two, I'm hoping will bless all of us as we see what God has for us tonight. But I titled the message, The Christ Who Knows, Calls, and Restores. The Christ Who Knows, Calls, and Restores. We talked about it briefly, and we'll get into it more deeply. But everything okay, sweetie? But when Jesus turned and asked a question about who had touched his garment, I believe strongly that him being God, he knew who touched his garment. But we're going to dig into a little bit deeply why Jesus, sometimes God asks questions, even though he has all the answers. And we'll see that in several passages. But there's kind of a question about his omniscience, all right? Jesus knew her long before she ever reached for him. Let me say that again. Jesus knew her, Jesus knew this lady, long before she ever showed up in the crowd and reached to touch his garment. His omniscience, and that's a theological term, I know, but that just basically just means that God knows everything. But he has omniscience and compassion at the same time. He knew her physical condition. We look at verse 26. It talks about her condition. She had suffered many things of many physicians and had spent all that she had and was nothing bettered, but rather grew worse. We look at verse 25. She had this problem for 12 years, which is interesting. I didn't really draw this conclusion this morning, but Jairus' daughter was 12 years old too, huh? That's a kind of an interesting connection. I don't know that means anything, but around the same time that Jairus' daughter was born, this lady came down with this issue. So I don't know how that... It's nothing to do with the message. I'm just doing the math, that's all right? But anyway, he knew her physical condition, all right? He knew her emotional and social isolation. We talked about this morning, but when you have an issue like this, there's some Levitical law that the Jews had to go by, and a lot of that caused some isolation. She was considered unclean, so there's a lot of like social interaction that she could not have. She couldn't worship with people. She couldn't go to the I keep thinking tabernacle. What's the word?
Synagogue?
Synagogue. She couldn't go to the synagogue for church like normal people would. And so she didn't have these interactions. There's a lot of things that she was missing, all right? So there's her emotional needs weren't being met. Her social isolation must have affected her. I remember during COVID, our social isolation caused a lot of emotional problems in our society. She's going through all these things, but then on top of that, her physical ailment. And we talked about it a little bit this morning. I don't pretend to know the exact cause of it. It doesn't say. It just said she had an issue of blood. And I'm sure it had to do with some lady issues and all that kind of stuff. But whatever it was, she's been bleeding pretty much continually for 12 years. And whatever health problems come along with that, I imagine she's probably anemic and all that kind of stuff, and have all these issues and having to dress things and all that kind of stuff. She's not living, let's just put it this way, she's not living her best life, right? This is affecting her this morning we used the word desperate, right? She was desperate at this point of her life. He knew the faith forming quietly in her heart. Jesus knew of her faith. As she reached out to touch his garment, God knew, and Jesus knew the faith that she had, that Jesus could actually do something about it. All right? And he knew her before she arrived, before she touched him, and before she spoke a word. Jesus knew her. If you look at Psalm 139, keep your finger in Mark because that's our main passage, but Psalm 139. And I want to read the first couple of verses. These verses, to me, these verses ought to be a comfort. It's not like a warning. It's not like God's like a boogeyman or anything like that. These verses ought to be a comfort, all right? And it says Psalm 139, starting in verse 1, O Lord, thou hast searched me and known me. Thou knowest my downsitting and mine uprising. Thou understandest my thought afar off. Thou compassest my path and my lying down, and art acquainted with all my ways. And I can go through this whole chapter, but we're going to stop there. The thing that God reminds me of, and the thing I want to tell you guys today, is that God knows you, God knows your heart, and he knows everything that we're going through. He knew this lady before she even came on the scene. Jesus had the benefit of planning, knowing that this lady is going to come, and knowing her from her childhood, and knowing everything that's going on. And again, to me, that's comforting because he knows everything that's going on in my heart, good, bad, or indifferent. You are never an anonymous face in God's crowd. He knows every hidden wound. Which is an interesting sentence because we didn't read the context of this passage, but in Mark chapter 5, Jesus has a crowd that's thronging him, and there's tons of people around him. It was to the point where when Jesus asked who touched me, his disciples were confused because there's so many people around him. The word that the chapter uses earlier is that thronging, all right? But even in all that chaos that's going on and all the physical interaction going on and all the tons of people that are around him, she was not anonymous. He knew her. All right? We'll get to it. So number one, Jesus knew her long before she ever reached for him. All right? Two, Jesus felt the touch of faith in a crowd of casual contact. All right? Jesus felt. even though Jesus was touched by a ton of people, just for the case of being in a crowd. But we ever see any of those videos of people getting on a train, like in Japan? I think it's Japan. And they're like packing people on there, and then someone's outside the train pushing. I don't know exactly how bad the throng was. I just understand that Jesus was not without physical contact. All right. But through all of that contact, he felt her touch. And she touched his garment. You know what I'm saying? Jesus felt it. The difference between proximity and belief, all right? Many pressed him, only one reached in faith. All right, look at verse 31 real quick here. 31? Yep, verse 31. Mark chapter 5, verse 31. And his disciples said unto him, Thou seest the multitude thronging thee, and sayest thou, Who touched me? All right, uses that word again, thronging. Also uses the word multitude. Hey, guys. But even in the midst of the thronging, even in the midst of the multitudes of people, that one lady is what he noticed. All right? Jesus felt the touch of this lady. How you doing? How you guys doing?
How are you?
Good to see you. Don't let Travis bother you. I know he's ugly. Cut that out, by the way. No, I'm just teasing. All right. Jesus felt the touch of faith in a crowd of casual contact. That's where there was. Many pressed him. Only one reached out in faith. All right. Jesus uses the word. The Bible uses the word virtue. All right. He felt virtue leaving him. Virtue, which basically means power. It's like he felt the power leaving him. All right. He felt the virtue going out, not accidentally, but purposely. All right, I don't think it's an accident that Jesus allowed power to go to this lady and be healed. It wasn't like, whoops, I didn't mean for that to happen. All right, he's God. He can heal who he wants to. But it says he felt the power going out. Faith is what drives the power of God into a desperate situation. I say that because this lady wasn't just another member of the crowd. She was reaching out in faith. And I want to find that verse here because it says it. Let me find it real quick here. Oh, here it is, verse 28. Let's do 27 and 28. When she had heard of Jesus, came in the press behind and touched his garment. All right. First off, Jesus, at this point in his ministry, Jesus' reputation is preceding him. She knew who Jesus was. She knew that he was going around doing miracles. He was already healing people. He was already casting out demons. And she knew him. She knew something of him. So when she heard that he was going to be nearby, she went to touch his garment. All right. In verse 20, it says, and this is why. This is why she did it. For she said, if I may touch his clothes, I shall be whole. All right. Let me say that one more time. If I may touch but his clothes, I shall be whole. It's like she knew where the power is to help in the problem that she had. She was desperate. She didn't have any way of healing herself. The physicians had been working for years. She was literally out of money because of all the problems, and she was at the end of herself. She was in the place where she was desperate, didn't have anywhere else to turn, but she knew this Jesus. Don't know that she met him before, but she knew of this Jesus, and she knew that power lied in Jesus. That's what faith is. This is not about the touch of a hand, but the trust of the heart. All right. Everyone may be near Jesus, but only faith lays a hold of him. Let's continue on from there. 3, Jesus asked a question, and I like this because I had to think about this for a couple of minutes. But Jesus asked a question not to gain knowledge, but to invite confession. All right. If you look at this verse here, Verse 30, I think, right? Verse 30. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that virtue had gone out of him, turned him about in the press and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And I had to question this because Jesus is the Son of God. Do you think he knew who touched his clothes? One, he probably knew every single individual that might have brushed up against him that day. Right? He knew who touched his clothes. God sometimes asks questions. We'll look at a couple of verses here. But God sometimes asks questions even though he doesn't need the answer. He knows the answer. All right? Let's look at a couple of these real quick here. Genesis chapter 3, verse 9. Keep your finger in Mark 5. In Genesis 3, verse 9. God's talking to Adam and Eve here. No, Abel. No, Adam. I'm sorry. Yeah, Adam. We'll do Abel next. Genesis 3, 9. And the Lord God called unto Adam and said unto him, Where art thou? And I'm not going to read the whole chapter, but in this passage here, Adam and Eve had sinned and they'd eaten the forbidden fruit and all that kind of stuff. And they heard God coming, as he normally would, walking through the garden. And they hid themselves because of their sin. And as God's walking through, he says, Where art thou? All right. Do you think God knows where Adam is? All right. He's asking a question that he knows the answer to. All right. Look at Genesis 4:9. Mine's on the same page pretty much. 4:9. Cain and Abel. And the Lord said unto Cain, Where is Abel thy brother? He says, I know not. Am I my brother's keeper? Do you think when he asked Cain where his brother is, he knew where he was? God knows the story, right? Blind Bartimaeus, all right? Let's look at Mark. Go all the way to Mark chapter 10. Past our passage for this evening, but Mark chapter 10, verse 51. To me, this is an obvious question, all right? Bartimaeus is blind, and Jesus asked him a question, and Jesus said in verse 51, And Jesus answered and said unto him, What wilt thou that I would do unto thee? Talking to a blind man, looking for healing, right? The blind man said unto him, Lord, that I might receive my sight. Obvious question, obvious answer. I don't think Jesus needed information in that question, right? I think he kind of knew the answer there, all right? Jesus knew the woman, but wanted her to step forward. His question is an invitation, not an investigation. Okay? Oftentimes, God speaks to us, and we see questions, not because God needs information, but because he wants that relationship with us. He wants to hear from us. He wants us to pour our heart out to him. He wants us to come to him and require of him. He wants to hear this woman come before him and pour her heart out to him, and he wants to restore her publicly. And that's the only reason why he asked the question, not because he needed the answer to it. All right? Christ draws us from secrecy to openness, not to shame us, but to free us. And we're going to look at this real quick here. Jesus brings her out of the shadows and into restoration. All right? You guys know what this word restoration means, right? When I think of the word restoration, I think of people that get a hold of like an old classic car and they try to bring it back to where it was when it was new. All right, like my dad, and I don't remember much about it, but I remember when I was little, my dad had this classic car. But the idea was it was the kind of car that came out when he was a young person, and they restore them and they bring it back to their former glory. And that's kind of what restoration is bringing someone back to where they once stood. Bringing them back, and particularly with God, he wants to restore us in such a way that we're being brought back into the fold. He doesn't want you to be separated from him. He's constantly seeking us. I oftentimes, if I'm struggling, I push God away, but he's constantly coming after me, wanting to restore me. if we stop and listen and come to him. He wants us to come to him. All right, Jesus brings her out of the shadows into the restoration. Let's read kind of how that looked, all right? Let's look at verse 32, I guess. And he looked around about to see her that had done this thing. All right, so he's looking for her. He knows who he's looking for, right? He looked around to see her, all right? But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing that what was done in her, came and fell down before him and told him all the truth. All right, so here he is in this crowd of people. The Bible uses the term multitudes and thronging. All right, so there's tons of people there. She's brought out in front of everyone and comes before Christ, reveals herself in front of everyone. Verse 34, and he said unto her, Daughter, thy faith hath made thee whole. Go in peace and be whole of thy plague. I think that's a special verse. I'm going to read it again. He said unto her, Daughter. Okay, to me, that's a personal title. That's you're my daughter. You're my family. I love you and I care for you deeply. That's a compassionate term, right? It's like she's not just some lady. She's my wife, right? When I refer to my wife, she's someone that I care about deeply. This term is he cares for her. He loves her, just like a father loves a daughter, all right? It says, Thy faith hath made thee whole. He's pronouncing in front of everyone that she's whole and she's complete now. She's been healed. This woman had faith in me, and I was able to heal her, and she's whole now. She's complete. And she said, Go in peace and be whole of thy plague. And I'm not sure all that happened after that. I imagine that part of the process, I mentioned it this morning, I imagine part of the process is she had to go to the temple and go before the priest and all that kind of stuff to be declared whole, not unclean anymore. But Jesus turned and asked for this lady to be revealed so that he can restore her in front of everyone. It's a sweet part of the story. It didn't just end in her healing and then slinking away privately. She was healed, but then she was also restored in front of everyone. I think that's neat. That's one of my favorite words, by the way, neat. She falls before him in fear and trembling. Jesus responds not with rebuke, but with tenderness. Okay? I like this because oftentimes we're afraid. If we've been away from God and we've been backsliding and we've been doing our own thing, we're afraid to come. We're afraid to be embarrassed. We're afraid to come before God because we know that we've been wrong. And the reality is God's just sitting there waiting for us to come back to him. He wants us to come back to him. He's excited to see us healed. He's excited to see us restored. He's excited to see us come back into the fold. All right? Jesus responds not with rebuke, but with tenderness, daughter. The only time in the gospel Jesus calls a woman daughter. All right, he restores. All right, he restores her body. She's made whole. He restores her soul because he talks about her faith making her whole, and he restores her peace. He tells her to go in peace. I am thankful that when I come back to God, that where I once was without peace, I can have peace once again. I don't come to God and I'm shamed. I don't come to God and I'm torn down and just belittled even more. I come before God and he restores unto me my peace. Whatever might be going on in my life, he can give me peace. And finally, her social standing or her social interaction is also restored. She's no longer unclean. She's no longer isolated. She can be amongst people once again. This is like, after 12 years, this is a whole new life for her. Like a new person, right? Doesn't that sound like salvation? What the doctors could not fix in 12 years, Jesus fixed in one moment. All right? Christ not only heals our need, he restores everything. All right? And then finally, Jesus uses her testimony to teach the crowd about faith. All right? He does this in a public way on purpose because This lady now has a testimony, doesn't she? Yep. Our testimony, basically, in sharing the gospel is the same thing. It's basically us telling our story. Me telling my story about what God did in my life. Yep. That's okay. You want to come up here? No, just kidding. That's our testimony. We think about someone giving testimony, maybe in a court trial or something like that. Someone takes a stand. They put their hand on the Bible and put their right hand on the Bible and their left hand up like that. And they promise they're going to tell the truth. And they basically sit on the stand, and they tell their story as they know it and as they remember it. That's their testimony. This lady has a testimony now. All right? She's a witness. She's a witness of the saving power of Christ, right? She's a witness from a former outcast, all right? She's a witness to now she has a story to tell of who she once was because of her ailment to now who she is now that she's whole. She was witness to this transformation or this transition from a life of turmoil to a life of peace. Again, that's our testimony. Her confession becomes a testimony that strengthens others. Her miracle prepares the crowd and Jairus to believe. Tonight we're not getting into Jairus. We talked about this morning. But Jairus' daughter is sick and is getting ready to die. But he's there also because they're on their way to see his daughter. Okay? All these people see this thing and they hear this thing, and Christ makes it public. It's not private. It's a public thing. So these people are encouraged, and they see the power of God, and they see the strength that we can get from walking with Christ. And Jesus still calls believers to step forward so that this story can glorify him. Jesus is still calling us to step forward and tell our story. Again, sharing the gospel with someone that needs the gospel doesn't have to be complicated. It just has to be, this is what God did in my life, this is who I once was, and this is who I am now today because of Christ. It doesn't have to be complicated. All right? Let's conclude with this, all right? A couple main bullet points here. He knew her. Again, that should be comfort. I have a God that knows me. It's not a God that's just off in the distance somewhere watching the world from a distance. I have a God that knows me personally, right? I think that's neat. He felt her faith. God saw her faith, and her faith made her whole, right? He called her out to come out so that the story would be known by others, right? And he sent her away in peace. She can have a life of peace now. The turmoil has come to an end, all right? Desperate faith becomes transforming faith when we bring our hidden wounds into the open at the feet of Jesus. I think, and at least this is how I experience it. When I come to Christ and I bring a burden to him, to me that's a moment of vulnerability. For me personally, I mentioned it this morning. I have a problem with pride. I like to think I've got things figured out. I like to think I can take care of my own business. I don't need help. I might need direction sometimes, but I don't need help. All right. And Sarah knows this. If I buy something that needs to be assembled, I don't want to read the instructions because I can figure it out. Right? That's what I think in my head. That's not true. I need help. All right, trust me. She knows I need help because she's helping me constantly, okay? She keeps me straight. All right. But there's a vulnerability in admitting that you need help and then bringing that forward to Christ and laying it at his feet. It's saying, I can't carry this burden. God, you carry it for me. And that's what he's asking for us tonight. Whatever it is that might be going on in our life, whatever it is that we're struggling with, if it's a sin problem or if it's a mourning problem, wherever the case is, God wants us to bring it to his feet and lay it at his feet. Just as the woman came forward in the crowd and laid and bowed down before him, that's what he wants from us. Lay it at his feet. He wants to carry the burden for us. He wants to make us whole. He wants to restore us. He wants to dismiss us in peace. Not dismiss us as in to get rid of us, but he wants us to go through life walking with Christ, a life that we have peace in our hearts. That's what he wants. We're going to move on from here to ending with a song, hymn number 482. Before that, I'm going to pray, and we'll end with a song. 482, more about Jesus. I just love hearing the stories of Jesus, the way he interacts with people in the Gospels. Sunday mornings, I'm doing a series in the book of Mark. I just happen to be filling in for Bruce tonight, so I kind of expounded a little bit what we talked about this morning. But we're going through the book of Mark, and I love hearing the stories of Christ because we see in a physical way, when he was here on this earth, a physical way that he interacted with the people that he loved. And it's the same way today. I have a God that loves me and cares for me, and we can learn these things and glean these things about God as we see the life of Christ.